And then we'll try to assemble it so that we can take in the big picture and see, what's actually there.
Life is this incredible miracle. So much beauty that's been around forever. We sometimes hear about one or another species that is endangered or disappearing. But most of us don't realize that it's almost every form of life that's declining, every year a bit more, everywhere on Earth. Let's look at a few examples. Take birds. In the US, a third of all birds have disappeared in the past 50 years. With regards to insects, the most detailed study ever done in Germany shows that the speed of disappearance is even faster, and they're still declining. You might remember road trips from your childhood with a windshield full of insects, but that's no longer the case. Large fish have disappeared to an even greater degree. There are only 10% left. The oceans are almost empty. Forests, we lose an area the size of Italy every year. The same decline happens with wetlands, mangroves, corals, and topsoil. So much has disappeared in just 1 or 2 generations.
I don't know if you've played the game Kerplunk when you were little, but it's a good way to visualize how these extinctions relate to us.
In the game, you take turns taking out a stick. The goal is to not let the marbles fall. Imagine for a second that each marble is a species: insects, birds, trees, everything that makes up an ecosystem. One of the marbles is us, humans. Every time we take over an ecosystem, clear a forest, drain a swamp, create monocultures, it's like we pull out a stick. At first, not much happens, so we keep going. But then one marble drops. A species goes extinct someplace. Then another and another. Until you take just one more stick and suddenly, nearly all the marbles come crashing down. Ecosystems behave in a somewhat similar fashion. They're remarkably resilient until they suddenly collapse. Here's an example from a place where we've pushed overfishing just a bit too far. Suddenly, this ecosystem collapsed, and the jellyfish population exploded and completely took over, and crowded out the remaining fish and everything else.
We humans tend to think that we're separate from nature. But when oceans are empty and forests are gone, when there are no insects to pollinate all our crops, we human beings come crashing down with the rest. Pollution is everywhere, and no one is safe from it. But so often, the worst kind of pollution is concentrated where working-class people and minorities live.
Every year in the US, 350,000 people's lives are cut short just from air pollution. And in Europe, it's 417,000. 417,000 deaths. There's another form of pollution that's found everywhere, but even less visible. Something we didn't know 50 years ago when we started producing plastic is that the plastic we throw out, or the plastics in the clothes we might be wearing right now, break down into microplastics. Tiny invisible bits that are carried everywhere. Literally everywhere. Researchers have gone to the most remote place on Earth, the Arctic. And when they melted a gallon of ice, they found it contains, are you ready, 53,000 particles of plastic, carried for thousands of miles by the wind. Microplastic is everywhere, in the ocean, in the rain, and the rivers. It's in your tap water. It's in bottled water. It's been found in beer and salt. It's in the air we're breathing right now, the air you're breathing too. According to researchers at the University of Newcastle in Australia, in 1 week we eat, drink, and breathe the equivalent of 1 credit card in plastic. That's 4 a month. It's even found in the placenta of pregnant mothers and in our bloodstream. Most likely there are microplastics in your bloodstream. What this is doing to our health we don't yet know. What we do know is that industry experts predict that plastic production won't decrease, but most likely increase by a factor of 4 in the next 30 years. how much plastic will end up in our bodies. And plastic is just one form of pollution. Meanwhile, we've released chemicals, pesticides, and heavy metals everywhere. You've probably also read that our rivers, lakes, and drinking water are full of medications like antidepressants and hormones. We know that this is doing weird things. Scientists have found that even in what may look like pristine lakes and rivers and national wildlife refuges, the chemicals and medication in the water disrupt the hormonal systems of wildlife and turn male fish into half-female beings. They have eggs in their testicles. It's in the water we humans drink also. Infant boys are developing more genital abnormalities and smaller penises. More girls are experiencing early puberty. Adult women appear to be suffering declining egg quality and significantly more miscarriages. In men, there's a boom in two-headed sperm. An international team, including researchers from the School of Medicine of Mount Sinai in New York, found that in just 40 years, the human sperm count in Western countries went down by almost 60%. Following the current trend, the team of researchers suggested sperm count could reach 0 in 20 years.
And of course, we all know this, it's getting warmer. Extreme weather events have always happened. But now, normal is no longer normal. Not when a city like Houston, Texas, has experienced a 500-year flood 3 years in a row. And do you remember these images? This was San Francisco, during the day. This is smoke from the massive fires.
Global warming doesn't only mean things get warmer, it means weather patterns get out of whack. We get floods and droughts that didn't used to exist for 1,000 years. Droughts all the way up to Sweden and Canada. Floods like we've never seen in Germany, Belgium, the UK, and so many other places. Weather patterns are changing everywhere. Take Malawi in East Africa. Because of droughts, floods, and certain farming practices, farmers' corn yield per acre fell from 7 bags to below 3. The country can no longer reliably feed itself. Put yourselves in the shoes of people there. Malawi contributed almost nothing, less than 0.1%, a rounding error, to the warming blanket, but they're hit really hard. A group of scientists in Switzerland found a clever way for us to get a sense of how quickly things will change. They published a study where they project, for all large cities around the world, what the weather will be like in 30 years. For example, what kind of climate will Montreal and Toronto have in 2050? It'll be pretty much like Washington, D.C. is today. That's the closest match the group of scientists found. No more snow, but mosquitoes. Boston, it'll be like Charlotte, North Carolina today. Chicago will be like Kansas City, and Kansas City will be like Dallas. Portland, Oregon will move south all the way to San Antonio. For San Diego, the closest match is Tripoli in Libya. Austin, Texas, Peshawar, Pakistan. Los Angeles, Hargeisa in Somalia. In Europe, Helsinki and Tallinn will move 1,600 kilometers south to Bratislava. Paris will move to Istanbul. Rome to Izmir in Turkey. And Madrid, the closest match is Tehran in Iran. It's as if the whole of Europe and the US moves hundreds of miles, and some bits drift off in less than 30 years.
Think about where you live and what makes it feel like home for you. You know, whatever feels like home will change.
Remember the heat wave of 2003 in Europe that caused 70,000 deaths? It was the hottest year on record in 500 years. By 2040, that will be an average summer. In 2050, scientists believe almost every summer will be hotter and some much hotter. When it comes to hurricanes, these are the places deemed at high risk. Here are the communities Moody's warns investors about because they'll experience severe water stress. When water gets scarce, people leave. These are the places where communities might not have a future because of recurring wildfires. Here are the communities where the heat stress in the summer will be so intense that working outside becomes impossible during the day, which brings down the local economy. And then there's extreme rainfalls and rising sea levels. This animation is based on important work published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The red zones on this map show the places that are unlivable hot zones today. It's 1% of the world's surface. In 2050, these are the areas projected to become so hot that life is almost impossible. And 20 years later, it's even worse. Global warming doesn't really capture this. It's more like global scorching. Estimates for climate refugees worldwide in 2050, that's less than 30 years from now, range from 200 million to 1 billion. Some of Central America and large parts of Africa will be unlivable hot zones, and millions will do whatever it takes to make it to the US and Europe to survive.
Time to move to our next topic, food.
There are 7.9 billion people on Earth right now, and there might be close to 10 billion of us in 2050. How are we going to feed all of us? There are 6 major breadbaskets in the world. Each one of them will face major issues. For example, in the Midwestern United States, extreme heat waves, droughts, and floods could cause large-scale crop failures. Not to mention that this breadbasket sits squarely on the Ogallala Aquifer, the biggest in the United States, and it's being pumped dry. Already, California faces massive water shortages because the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains no longer feeds the rivers reliably, and the aquifers there, too, are running dry. No water, no food. Every one of the 6 major breadbaskets faces new risks, and by 2050, researchers believe that 1 year out of 3, 2 breadbaskets or more will fail at the same time, leading to hunger and social unrest.
If the warming passes certain thresholds, it sets off chain reactions that speed up the warming even more. And each one of those tipping points is like a booby trap that can't be stopped once it's set off.
For example, by 2050, the Amazon rainforest, because so much of it has been cut back, might reach the point where the water cycle changes and the remaining forest dries out, burns, and turns into a savanna. We'll lose the most magnificent ecosystem in the world, and with it, the indigenous communities with their ancestral traditions and wisdom. And the smoke of half a continent will add a whole new layer to the atmosphere. In Alaska, Russia, and Canada, the permafrost, the ground that is permanently frozen, starts to thaw, and it releases huge amounts of methane into the atmosphere, a gas that traps 80 times more heat than carbon dioxide. If we hit these tipping points, things spiral out of control, and we land in what scientists call a hothouse scenario, where climate systems shift to something entirely new, and civilization as we know it is likely to collapse.